Incremental once again. This is the second video in the Pan-African Congress series, its history. And where we left off with part one was explaining the fifth Pan-African Congress, which was held in Manchester, England in 1945. So we understood that the declaration to the colonial peoples was hammered out mainly the two joint secretaries, George Padmore and Kwame Nkrumah, had crafted this declaration. It was approved, adopted by the Pan-African Congress, October 15th through the 21st in 1945. Now, what I'm going to do, because I didn't have it in front of me on the last video, I will endeavor to read this, because what this particular declaration does, it really shows how Pan-Africanism, number one, gained its revolutionary character from this point. Two, the idea of Pan-Africanism and African nationalism took concrete expression, and it really culminated it. And third, because they adopted Pan-African nationalism, more work would be done at home in Africa. This would be the generation that brought independence to countries in Africa. We will see later on. But these congresses took a different form, if you will, upon the independence of Ghana as well. So they were called other things, which I will be getting into. At that particular point in time, you'll see that Pan-Africanism gained primary expression on the continent itself. So let me get into this. Declaration to the Colonial Peoples of the World, written by Kwame Nkrumah. I quote, "We believe in the rights of all people to govern themselves. We affirm the right of all colonial peoples to control their own destiny. All colonies must be free from foreign imperialist control, whether political or economic. The peoples of the colonies must have the right to elect their own government, a government without restrictions from a foreign power. We say to the peoples of the colonies that they must strive for these ends by all means at their disposal. The object of the imperialist power is to exploit. By granting the right in the colonial peoples to govern themselves, they are defeating that objective. Therefore, the struggle for political power by colonial and subject peoples is the first step towards and necessity prerequisite to the complete social, economic, and political emancipation. The Fifth Pan-African Congress, therefore, calls on the workers and the farmers of the colonies to organize effectively. Colonial workers must be in the front lines of the battle against imperialism. The Fifth Pan-African Congress calls on the intellectuals and professional classes of the colonies to wake up to their responsibilities. The long, long night is over. By fighting for trade union rights, the right to form cooperatives, freedom of the press, assembly, demonstration, and strike, freedom to print and read the literature which is necessary for the education of the masses, you will be using the only means by which your liberties will be won and maintained. Today, there is only one road to effective action: the organization of the masses. Colonial and subject peoples of the world unite. And of course, there is an exclamation mark at the end of that last sentence. Very profound document. So as we can see, what tends to pop out obviously is the organization of the masses. So they believe in effective organization once the struggle hit the continent. They understood that the intellectuals, professional classes, and the workers were the elements that were the key, and emphasis on workers and the peasants, mind you, that those elements being key to final victory. So we can see here that the stage was set for a confrontation with colonialism out of the Big Six European powers at that particular time. So as work was moving along, Kwame Nkrumah took a leading role at that particular point in time. Now, when this Congress ended, by the way, they set up a working committee with Du Bois as chairman, and of course, Nkrumah as general secretary. The Congress took a headquarters, but moved it to London, where the West African National Secretariat was also established. Now, the purpose which they put into action in West Africa and the policies agreed upon in Manchester, that they would work feverishly to help with propaganda which would aid the struggle in West Africa, where Ghana is located as well. And of course, Kwame Nkrumah was requested to come to the secretaryship of the United Gold Coast Convention, which was a political party in Ghana at that particular time, made up of intellectuals and elites. So he moved back around 1947, and which at this particular point was a starting off point for African independence and of course unity. Now, another Pan-African Congress wasn't held until years later. At this particular time, the program was Independence and Unity. And as we'll see, going into the Ghanaian independence, the Republic and the Convention People's Party took up the responsibility to organize on that particular level. So we go now to the post independence of Ghana, where Kwame Nkrumah is now president. And one of the things he did for the continuity of the spirit of the Congresses in a independent nation, developing nation that declared socialism as the economic system that they would pursue, the understanding of the accumulated experience of African people's unity. Um, at this particular point, 1958, a year later from the independence, um, at this point, the Africans had a clear knowledge of the objectives sought, and they were in a position to undertake really a critical appraisal of developments in the struggle, anti-colonial struggle at that particular time. Of course, their historical position as well. So what they wanted to do at this particular point was to draw valuable lessons from the experience. So they were determined to continue. And so shortly after Ghana achieved independence, uh, they really uh, began a succession of things, of events actually, and because of the interest in the movement toward emancipation and unity, they quickly, I say they, meaning Convention People's Party at this particular time, they they moved swiftly to plan um, to actually convene meetings that would give some sort of strategic understanding as a collective body, and so it was necessary at that time to call for in Accra, Ghana, that is, a conference of independent African states. This was held in Ghana. At the time, there were about, if memory serves, I believe 8 independent states at that particular time. And the purpose was, one, uh, to really get to know each other, discuss the questions that they understood mutually. Two, they wanted to consolidate their independence. Three, to explore the possibility of strengthening economic and cultural ties between the independent states, to strengthen them, and then of course finding ways to help Africans in zones not yet free to become independent from colonial rule. So the African leaders were all anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, and they understood that this conference of independent African states really heralded the fact that Pan-Africanism had moved to the African continent, and of course that's where it really belonged. As you see earlier, the Pan-African Congresses were held in London and Paris. I think one was in New York. So you can see here that with the independence of Ghana, finally, Pan-Africanism found expression where it belonged, the African continent. So this particular conference, of course, as I said earlier, it was held in Accra, and as I said earlier, those things were discussed. And then, of course, later that year, in December, there was another conference held in Accra. That was the All African Peoples Conference. in December of '58. And at this particular conference, I believe about 62 African nationalist organizations were in attendance, and they discussed various aspects of the liberation movement in enemy-held territories on the continent. The need was for the organization to unify action between African political movements, which is very important too. And then, of course, fast forward to 1961, there was a All African Peoples Conference held in Cairo in '61. And at this point, the whole question of neocolonialism was brought to the agenda to discuss in the that stage of the African revolutionary struggle. So we can see that what developed at this particular point coming out of the Congresses and of course into the independence of Ghana as it developed, there was a call for unity, anti-imperialist action between the peoples of not just Ghana, but of the continent themselves, to bring a closer cooperation, to provide a nucleus for a wider a union of African states, understanding on the level of the actual executive branches of the government and the nation heads themselves, and just to hammer out an attack against imperialism. So at this particular point, it was developing in Africa a revolutionary force, which really started with these attempts that was made to take what they learned in these congresses and within these particular movements, take the qualitative aspect that would provide the breakthrough needed for a impetus for unification, mind you, which would provide that forward thrust for that. And in a limited basis at that particular time, yes. But at the same time, you had colonialism that was doing everything it could to thwart this process. And so it's at that point that what we'll do is we will end that here for now. There's much more. We will go into the attempts, some of the other attempts at the unification level, at the head of state level, and then we'll get into the creation of the Organization of African Unity. So we will put another pin in it. Thank you for listening, and we will pick it up next time with part 3.